Hello. When I was considering buying a book scanner, I searched YouTube for product reviews, but I was disappointed in the review videos that people are making. They all kind of went the same way. The tech reviewer takes a long time pulling the various components out of the box and commenting on each one, like, ooh, and here's the AC adapter. And then when they finally get it all set up, they make like 2 scans and then go, neat, well, like, comment, and subscribe. But it doesn't help me to hear from somebody who just pulled it out of the box for the first time. I want to hear from somebody who's been using it for several months and scanned like 4 dozen books already. So, several months and at least 4 dozen books later, here is my review of this device. Now, the company's name is spelled CZUR, and I think every review video I watched had a different guess as to how that's pronounced. I've heard CZUR or CZUR. I've heard both sure and CZUR. So I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and pronounce it CZUR. This model is specifically the CZUR Aura. They make 2 versions of the Aura, one with a battery pack and one without. When I bought mine, the Aura Pro had the battery pack and the just Aura did not. Now it seems they've changed the naming such that the Aura Pro is the one without the battery pack, and the one with it is now the Aura X Pro. In any case, I have the one with no battery pack, which just means that I have to plug it into a power outlet. The video is going to be divided into 3 parts. They should be bookmarked in the progress bar on YouTube. In part 1, I'm going to show the typical scanning workflow, and we'll talk about speed and some of the options you have while scanning. In part 2, I'll talk about some of the limitations I've encountered. And in part 3, I discuss the OCR software that comes with it. OCR is optical character recognition. It's the software that tries to understand the text as text, and thus make the documents searchable. But we'll get to that by the end of the video. So to begin, I want to say, this device is excellent, and for my use case, it was well worth the money. My wife and I both have PhDs, and we own a lot of books that help us in our research. But now, both of us are moving overseas, from the US to Japan, and it would be very difficult to take our book collections with us, but also difficult to do our research without those books at our disposal. And while I did find a handful of limitations, which I discuss later in the video, by and large, the CZUR Aura did exactly what I hoped it would, and it did it quickly. And just to be clear, we do own all of these books, so we have the right to scan them, as long as we use them privately. Now, that's an important point, because the fact that these are for our own private research use also informs on what kind of quality we're willing to accept. If you're an archivist attempting to preserve the material you're scanning for a public collection, for example, then you might have higher standards than we do. We just want to get our books scanned, and quickly, because we can't carry them on the airplane. Part 1. Scanning workflow. The software opens on what I call the light screen, but we'll press this button to go to the dark screen, where the scanning happens. The first thing I do is scan the cover of the book. The settings you'll need for scanning are all right here and can be changed before any scan. You can mix and match within the same book. So first I set it to color and to a single page. Now you can see on screen there's a big U-shaped row of lights being reflected right back into the lens. But the designers thought of this. There is this piece, which attaches magnetically to the back of the stand, which gives you an alternate light source for glossy pages or for book covers. You turn it on by tapping it on the back here. Much better. Now we can click this button to scan. With the cover scanned, we can switch to black and white or to grayscale for the pages inside, and I find grayscale is a bit more clear. We also switch to 2-page mode. It scans both pages at once, but then saves each page as its own image. By default, it saves the left page first, then the right, which is correct for a book like this one. But if you're scanning a book that goes the other way, like this Japanese book, you can switch that by clicking here and setting it in this menu. I did some experimenting to know exactly how soon the page can be turned after making each scan. These thumbnails that come up after each scan are the cue that I watch for. First, they come up with the weight symbol over them, and then they finish and display the full thumbnail. As soon as the weight symbol comes up, it's already captured the image, and you can turn the page without ruining anything. As soon as the weight cursor goes away, you can actually click the next scan. If I only have to use one hand or the other to hold the book open, it's easy enough just to click the on-screen button to make a scan. I just keep the mouse cursor parked over this button, and I can reach over and hit the mouse button after turning the page. But in the middle of most books, you'll want to hold it open with both hands, and that's where the foot pedal comes in. It's included with the scanner, and it just plugs right into the back here. These yellow finger cots, as they call them, can be recognized by the scanning software and edited out. They are always replaced with white space, even if the page has some shading in that area, so try to keep them in the margins. In my experience, they're not very comfortable, and it takes a lot of strength to hold down some of the stiffer books, but there's probably nothing you can do about that. Once you get in rhythm, you can get going pretty quickly. Here's an example of the rhythm. Scan. Page. Scan. Page. Scan. I found I could do a 300-page book in under an hour, and even a 750-page book took only about an hour and 15 minutes of scanning. Saving the books afterward takes additional time, and we'll go into a little bit later. Now, let's say in the middle of scanning I make a mistake. My hand slips or something, and the photo gets messed up. And you can see in this preview that something's wrong. I'm going to want to delete those and try again, but I can't do that from this screen. For some reason, I have to go back to the light screen, wait for these thumbnails to load, scroll down to the most recent ones, and delete them from there. Then go back to the dark screen to continue scanning. My humble suggestion to the software team is to just let me delete the thumbnails right from the scanning screen. Okay, when we are finally done, we head back to the light screen to finish up. There are a number of output options we can try here, but the two I've used the most are the plain PDF, which is just the series of images that we scanned, and the searchable PDF, which has those same images plus the OCR text information. Saving as a plain PDF is relatively fast. Of course, with the very short example I did here in the video, it's going to be fast no matter what, but I'd say this process is fast enough that even a 300 book is finished in just a handful of seconds. And I always like to save at the highest resolution. Saving as a searchable PDF takes longer, of course, because it has to run the OCR software. And let's look at some of the options there. We'll talk about these language options later in the video, but for now I want to point out that you can also choose low, medium, or high quality image output. There's also this additional option here, keep original image or auto adjust. I strongly recommend switching this to keep original image. I'll show you the difference. This page happened to have a chart printed sideways on the page. Here's the original image. This book is a little older, so it has a handwritten chart in it. That's not rare in older academic journals. In this original image, all of the entries in this chart are legible. But here's the auto-adjusted image. The OCR software tried to identify these handwritten characters, but anything it couldn't identify, it then thought was some sort of noise that it had to clean up. So a lot of these figures have become almost blurred out. It's understandable if the OCR can't understand this, either because it's a chart, or because it's sideways, or because it's handwritten, or whatever. But it's another thing entirely for it to then go blurring out the parts it doesn't understand as if they were errors. There's no need for this. And in fact, I've never seen a case where auto-adjust made anything better, only worse. So I recommend choosing keep original image every time. And you will have to do it every time, because every time you go to save as a searchable PDF, it remembers all of your choices on this screen. It remembers that you chose high quality, it remembers that you did not check the box to standardize the output page size, and so on. But to my annoyance, it does not remember that you chose keep original image, and it defaults back to auto-adjust every single time. Another humble suggestion to the software team. Not only should keep original image be the default to begin with, but it should also remember that you chose that last time, like it remembers the other choices on this screen. Thank you. Saving as a searchable PDF takes considerably longer, long enough to go and get a cup of tea, because of course the computer is running the OCR software on every page. An exact time per page depends on how many words and how complicated the text is, but in general, I'd say a 300-page book takes a few minutes, and a 700-page book can take 10 minutes or even more. Now, this window does say that saving the PDF is a background process. I haven't really tested that because, frankly, I like having a break before scanning the next book. In particular, it gives the muscles in my hand a chance to rest from having to hold the pages open, which can get tiring. Part 2. Problems and limitations. Again, for most books, everything went smoothly and there were no problems. But it's worth talking about the limitations I encountered because for your use case, they might be more prominent than they were for me. I did find one book in which the font size was so small that the scanner couldn't resolve the characters properly. I wasn't looking for a book with especially small type or anything, it's just one of the books from my collection that I needed to scan. And as you can see here, the Roman characters at this size are actually pretty readable. It's just the Chinese characters at this very small font size that the Aura can't resolve. To make a comparison, I held my smartphone at about the same height as the Aura's camera, but the result was about the same, so the phone couldn't really capture Chinese characters this small either. So then I tried it in my flatbed scanner. This isn't anything special, just a $200 print fax scan all-in-one from an office supply warehouse. And its results are on screen. Now to be clear, doing this whole book on a traditional flatbed scanner would have taken much, much longer. And the results would have been worse in other ways, like the dark edges near the spine. So how small was that? Well, I know type is usually measured in point sizes, but I don't know how to do that for type that's already on the printed page. There probably is a way, I just don't know what it is. So I've got this close-up of some lines of text next to a millimeter ruler. If you're scanning Roman characters this small, it's probably okay, but for more complicated characters from other languages, it can become unreadable. I also had some issues with books or other materials that are glossy. For one thing, a few books that are printed on matte paper actually have glossy ink, which I just didn't realize. The scans I made of this book here have patches that are washed out because I scanned the whole thing without realizing that that would become a problem. The glossy light adapter probably would have worked well here. It just didn't occur to me to use it since I didn't register this book as being glossy. So when you're scanning, be on the lookout for sneaky inks that are glossy even if they're on matte paper. In fact, the glossy light adapter works really well in most cases. It solves the glare problem in most of the cases I found, but I did find a few where it didn't quite eliminate glare. This trade newsletter about a specific genre of Japanese music, for example, is published with 2 full A4 pages next to each other on glossy paper. Even with the glossy light attachment, there are still glare spots near the top. It's still legible, just harder to read. This book has very large pages, and it has that glossy ink problem, so I do have to use the glossy light adapter. But the pages are so large, it seems that the software can't help but pick up on the fact that parts of the pages are more dimly lit than others, and it seems to exaggerate this on screen. At first, I tried to fix this by shining extra lights at the book, just flooding the pages with as much light as possible, but it seemed that the software was always correcting for this, no matter how much light I added. And it was always keeping parts of the pages unpleasantly shaded. The solution was actually not to use any extra lighting at all, but to adjust this slider here on the screen, all the way up to max, which then kept the page areas lighter without washing out the text. Lastly, my wife had some materials that at some point had been photocopied onto these large A3 sheets. These were supposed to be 2 pages, right and left, but the issue is that the CZUR software uses a topographic scan to determine where the break between the 2 pages should be. In other words, on a normal book, it can tell where to separate the right and left pages by where the valley is in the middle of the book. But since these were flat, there was no valley, and it broke the pages incorrectly. The solution was to fold them in half a little, to make a valley before scanning. Then the page division went smoothly. So it worked, but it was a little annoying. Part 3. The OCR software. Lastly, I want to talk a bit about the OCR feature. I need to point out the OCR software is not by the CZUR company, but it's bundled with the product when you buy it. It's actually called ABBYY. I don't know if they want that to be Abby or ABBYY or what. And that is also available as separate software. So the observations here don't reflect the CZUR hardware necessarily, but since ABBYY is something that your money is going to buy if you buy the CZUR, then I'll include a brief review of it in this video. Now, presumably, you could also buy a different OCR software and feed the plain images that you've scanned into that software, at least in theory, but I haven't tried this. In any case, the ABBYY is the one that's built into the CZUR software suite. When you save as a searchable PDF, you're given the option to show what language the text is in. And you can specify more than one language, which is great since my research area involves Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. The books I scan tend to be a mix of English with at least one of those other languages. This book I've been using to demonstrate, for example, is written in English, but occasionally uses Japanese characters, and like most Japanese text, also Chinese characters. And since we're discussing sources from the Tang Dynasty, of course the characters are traditional, not the modern simplified characters. So on this screen, I can specify English, Chinese traditional, and Japanese, all in the same document. Note that the order doesn't matter. Although I chose English first here as the main language, it actually reordered them into alphabetical order anyway. Helpfully, it remembers these choices for the next scan you make in case that book has the same selection of languages. And if it doesn't, you can always change it. So let's scan a few passages and see how it goes. First, let's look at a passage in pure English. I don't see any errors. It understood this italic text and it got the quotes correct. I tried to find a single language passage that had some OCR errors in it, but really, it all turned out fine. Now let's try this passage, which has a mix of English and Chinese with a little bit of Japanese. This is where it starts to fall apart. The missing spaces here and here aren't that much of an issue, but this EI here is actually supposed to be the first Chinese character in this group, but it's mistaken it for two Roman characters. It makes the same mistake again here, where this S3 was actually supposed to be a Chinese character. So the problem seems to be that in a multi-language text, it doesn't quite know where to switch between languages. Notice also it's removed the line over the U in Rinyu at the end of line 2, and over the O in Taigensho in line 3. Even though I chose Japanese as one of the languages, it seems not to expect that some of that Japanese might be Romanized, and consistently missed these macrons, those are the lines over the vowels, which are an essential part of Romanized Japanese. Although I do prefer Romanization of Japanese without macrons, but that's a diatribe for another day. It also missed the accent over this French author's name, Demiéville. Although since French was not one of the languages I specified, I suppose I can cut it a break there. But I feel like it still could have gotten that. I mean, any text ostensibly in English might include a foreigner's name with some accent marks, and I feel like the OCR software should be prepared for that. So they've got some work to do on multi-language support. That said, I've found so far that the search function is still very helpful. Even if it might miss some instances of a word here and there, it's much better than not being searchable at all. However, if your intended use was to, let's say, feed the OCR text into a parser to analyze language usage, or some other computer-assisted textual analysis, you might get some skewed results due to errors like these. One last thing before the end. Since the searchable PDF is just the regular PDF plus some text data, I decided to compare file sizes to see how much bigger the extra text data made each file. But comparing the searchable and non-searchable outputs of the same book scan consistently showed that the searchable one is smaller? Now why would that be? Opening both and zooming into the maximum size, we can see that the plain PDF has a greater resolution than the searchable one. And that's with both set to the high resolution output. Apparently, high resolution for plain PDF is somehow larger than high resolution for the searchable PDF. And I don't know why that would be. I don't know much about how OCR software works. Maybe there's some problem in attaching text data to a large image. I'm not really sure. In any case, I prefer the larger, crisper image if possible, until I need to search, in which case it's the searchable one that comes in handy. So I've actually been saving every book I scan as both plain PDF for the higher resolution and searchable PDF for the search function. I have enough hard drive space for that, but it's still a bit of an aggravation. Well, I hope this has been helpful to someone considering buying a CZUR scanner. Again, in most cases, it's been wonderful to use and produces great results. If this video seemed to focus on the limitations or problems, well, that's only because those are what potential buyers most want to be aware of. In general, though, for my use cases, this has been worth the money. If anyone has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section. I can't promise I know the answers, but I'll tell you what I can. Thank you, and have a great day. Oh, and if you have a cat, sometimes this happens while scanning.